Hello guys, I'm Superon, welcome back to the channel, and we're here at Auto Shack, and this week we've got a very special car with an amazing backstory. You're going to want to stick around for this. So this is a US import 1972 Porsche 911T 2.4 litre Targa with the long nose front ends, and everything about this configuration of the car, not only the royal purple paint, makes it very rare and desirable. This is the same owner that also has the Porsche 911 930 Turbo we did an episode on here at Auto Shack, and he also owns the E30 M3 we also did an episode, and this is another one of his collection. So not only is this a rare car, but it has got an amazing backstory of how it got to this point. So first of all, let's look at the original Porsche features. So let's start with the most obvious feature of this car, and that is the Targa roof. Convertible cars of this era did not have a very good safety reputation. In the event of a crash, they folded in half, and if you rolled it over, it was game over. And also, cutting off the roof sacrificed a massive amount of shell rigidity, and they were all a bit floppy to drive. So Porsche designers got busy, and in the 1965 Frankfurt Motor Show unveiled this with the Targa hoop. Earlier cars actually had a fabric plastic rear window, but from 1969 onwards, you could get this futuristic looking glass dome on the back, which is now exactly what you think of when you hear Porsche Targa, even on the new ones. Being a 72, this has got the brushed aluminium hoop. From 74 on, they went to black, but when you see this wraparound glass rear, there's no mistaking what this is. So from the back, you can see this is badged up as a 911T, and that's not for turbo, and that's actually model specific. You have the 911T, the 911E, and the 911S. The T is the entry model, the E is the mid-range, and the S was the top of the range. In 72 and 73, they all had the 2.4 litre engine with different states of tune. In the UK, the 2.4 was carburetted and pushed out 130 horsepower. But because this one is a US model, they had mechanical fuel injection, so it came out of the factory with 140 horsepower. So another thing that makes this model in particular incredibly desirable is it is what's called a long hood model. And quite simply, that means it has got a long hood. On the 930s and 964, this bodyline here continues, and it has a much shorter bonnet. Same with the wings, carries on there, and this is where the bumper starts. So this is an age-related thing, not a model specific. All 911s from 1965 to 1974 had the longer nose, but because these are getting over 50 years old now, they're getting much rarer, and because of that, much more desirable. And the thing that makes this car the rarest of all is the fact it's a 1972 model, and that is the only year they had this. As you know, of course, on the Porsche, the engines are in the rear, and they have a dry sump oil system, which means they have an external oil tank to hold the surplus of oil. Now, they're quite big, they hold 8 or 9 litres of oil, and in all Porsches up to 72, they put the oil tank right at the back behind the wheel. So to improve weight distribution, and of course weight hanging right out the back, they moved the oil tank to here. On the rear oil tank models, you'll fill them up from the engine bay. There's a little cap in there and it goes right down. But with the tank at the front, they needed a new fill point. Excellent idea, you might think. In theory. So the biggest problem with this is people. Something the Porsche designers didn't think about is, what do you think this looks like? A petrol fill-up point. As of course all Porsche owners know, with the engine in the back, the fuel tank is in the front. So the fuel filler is actually always in the front wing. And with most petrol stations of this era having petrol attendants that filled up your car for you, resulted in a lot of oil tanks being filled up with petrol. Which, as you can imagine, petrol doesn't quite have the same lubrication efficiency as oil, which resulted in a lot of disasters. So after 72, they got rid of this idea, moved the oil tank back to the rear to fill up in the engine bay. It wasn't until the 964 model that they started putting oil tanks back here again, but they still did away with this filler and just had a long pipe all the way up into the engine bay. So that's all the bits that make this car so special from a Porsche point of view. But then when you find out the story of how it got to this country, because as I said, it's a US import, it gets even more fascinating. In the 930 Turbo video, which is the same owner, I said that he bought the car from America and the pictures online were like a movie set. He bought it from Texas and it was on a big Texas ranch, barns and fields and everything like that. And he bought that one over, got it registered, and he's had that for a long time. So he bought this one also from America in 2011, had it imported over. Once it touched down on UK soil, he went to get it registered with the DVLA, and they said, we've got a problem. This car doesn't exist and you can't register it here in the UK. So obviously his heart sank and he thought, oh no, what have I done? So he got back in contact with the seller all the way over in Kentucky in America and said, look, what is going on? What is this car? And you have to give a big credit to the seller here, because he could have just said, sorry mate, sold a scene. But what he actually did was employed a private investigator to search what was happening in this situation. He went back through the entire history of the car, and with something this old, you couldn't just Google it, you couldn't just look through databases. It predates that by a long way in the 70s. So now I'm imagining this Columbo kind of guy going through all old microfiches, looking through police reports, looking through manufacturer records. And what he actually found out is in the 70s, it actually got stolen and recovered. And back then in America, if something got stolen and recovered, all they did was just slap a new VIN on it, which is why when it came over to this country, the VIN numbers and all the part numbers didn't line up with what the official manufacturer's records said it should be. And the private investigator didn't stop there. He went back right to the original bill of sale and found out that this car has got quite a famous first owner. The records show that in 1972 it's purchased brand new by Ed Marino, who is a really famous American football player and also then continued to become an actor as well. In 1971, at 21 years old, he's an up-and-coming football college star. He came runner-up in the Heisman Trophy, which is the highest finish for any IVA player. He then won the Maxwell Award and the UPI College Football Player of the Year, and then in 1972 he got drafted into the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings are dressed all in purple and nicknamed the Purple Vikings or the Purple People Eaters. So then what he done in 1972 to celebrate his success was went out and bought a bright purple Porsche to match his team colours. Ed Marino is still alive, so I'm sure he has very fond memories of the early days of this Porsche's life. So now all this newfound information was sent over to the UK, and the car was taken to our local Porsche main dealer in Colchester to put all the jigsaw pieces away and to identify that this car is actually what it is. The other thing that's caused a lot of questions when it came over with all the VIN plates is when it's touched down on UK soil, it was actually red. So Colchester then sent it to Porsche HQ in Reading, and they stripped it down to find all the original build numbers from under the dash, under the carpets, and confirmed this is the actual car that he bought. So they certified it, put all the proper original numbers back in, and he could finally register it on the road in the UK. So when he found out it was originally this gorgeous royal purple colour, he wanted to put it back to factory. So he booked it in at DLF Classic Cars, which is actually quite local to us, and they did a full bare metal restoration. They took all the paint off, they took the windows, every single trim, rubber, it was down to a bare shell. And they actually discovered that before it was red, it was actually silver as well. So it had been purple, then silver, then red. So they took all them layers off back to the bare metal and did a full respray. And I have to say, this is one of the best resprays I've ever seen. When he said this was done way back in 2011, I couldn't believe that this is over a decade old. Everything is absolutely perfect in every shut, every trim, every rubber has been put on. Like, this is better than when it came out of the showroom. Every body line, every door gap is perfect. It is like a new car, not a 1972. When he had the respray done, he actually took off the US spec chrome bumpers, and he had these colour-coded additions put on as well, which I must say look a lot nicer. Same at the rear, this should have the chrome US spec bumpers on it, but he's put these colour-coded additions that look stunning. He's still got all the original chrome, so he could put it back to 100% factory if he wanted to as well. And in here we have the iconic Porsche Flat 6. So at the beginning I said the 2.4 UK spec was carburetted, the US spec was mechanical fuel injection, which is where it got its extra 10 horsepower. Now you might notice in here, we're back on carburetors. While it was in America, it had a Weber conversion, so it's got triple Webers, so it will make even more power. It also came with all the US spec mechanical fuel injection in a box, so he could put it back to factory if you wanted to as well. But these do sound amazing. Another thing the private investigator turned up was in its life, it's also used as some time trial car park racing. And when it arrived here, it has got this kind of aeroplane spec, quick release racing belt, and the factory seat belt cut off. Even though it's still got the popper, the real belt has been chopped off. So that is another job we've got here, because I'm not sure I'd really want to be in a crash with this holding me in. I think it would do more damage. So I've already started on some of the jobs that need doing while it's here. The first and main one, of course, is a 911, is oil leaks. The cam covers are leaking all over the exhaust, which smokes like mad and stinks. So we've got some genuine Porsche rocker cover gaskets, and I resealed all 4 rocker covers and did a full oil change as well to clear up all of those leaks. And with the mechanicals all done, it's on to a lot of electrical gremlins on this one. So with a little bit of digging around, I found we had a lot of loose wires everywhere. I've already had a tidy up in the battery under here and sorted all the terminals and the wires going to there because that was a big bird's nest. At the back under the carpet here, there's just a wiring mess. We've got old stereo equipment, old alarms, wires everywhere. So I think the best thing to do is going to be take it all out. Old plugs like this, I think that's an alarm. We'll get rid of all this. And also under here, we've just got wires everywhere. More stereo equipment that's not really needed, and I don't think it even works. So the best thing to do, I think, is going to be rip all this out. So a bit of a challenge with this wire here, it seemed to go everywhere. So it goes through the air vent, into the bottom of this metal one here, through this concertina one, then up into the dash, into the car that way. But it also comes back out here and actually goes into the cabin through this hole here. And I couldn't work out what it's for or how to get it out. So I traced it back the other way in the cabin and found out it was actually for the stereo, connects into the stereo and the amps here, and it's for the remote. It's the infrared there, what the remote connects to. So that's run all the way through the vents, into the front compartment, then through the cabin, then up into the bottom of the stereo. So that was a long way of going about it. And I've just installed the new heater blower motor here, because the old one decided to seize up and catch fire. So that's all in, so that can go back in, and then we'll be done. So let's go through all the parts I've just taken out of the car. We've got some fatalities, we've got some dodgy wiring, and we've got some stuff that was just asking for trouble in the long run, so it's all come out. So let's start with the near fatality, and that's from this, the heater blower motor. The other day I drove the car in, left it running for a little while, then all of a sudden coming out of the front bonnet, a whole load of plume of smoke came out of the vent at the top, and then the engine cut out and the whole car just went dead. Nothing worked at all. So quickly diagnosed where the smoke was coming from, and that was from a seized heater blower motor. So just all of a sudden it seized up and attempted to start a little electrical fire, but that didn't explain why the rest of the car wasn't working. I checked the fuses, the fuse hadn't blown, which was strange. None of the wiring to this had melted, and none of the wiring under the dash. I checked the ignition switch, that was all working, pinned all that out. And then I noticed connected to the ignition switch was an immobiliser. So I ringed out either side of the immobiliser, and it turned out that had stopped working. And what they'd done is they'd immobilised the full ignition circuit coming out of the key to the rest of the car. Now on a modern car, that's not too bad. All an ignition key does is just turn on all the rest of the modules around the car. On a classic car like this, the entire power for everything goes through the ignition switch. So when this seized, obviously there's a massive surge of power going to this because it's a dead short. And what it had done is blown up the immobiliser. There's just too much current, and before the fuse even blew, it killed the immobiliser. So we've taken all that out and we're going to replace that. So all the immobiliser wiring is dead. We've got a brand new genuine motor, so that's all gone in and that's in the car now. We've got new gas struts for the bonnet and the boot because they kept falling down and eating me when I was trying to work on the car. So they're all in. So now the bonnet and boot stays up. And next up was the seat belt. Like you saw at the beginning, it didn't have a driver's seat belt. It just had that aircraft style lap belt. It still had the remains of the original Porsche US spec button and the clip at the top. And then when I took the quarter card off, I just found that they just chopped off the reel and left it in there. In fact, looking at this, which is a bit odd, the original one has VW written on it. How peculiar. And on the passenger side, it had an aftermarket Secure-On seatbelt fitted. So we've got a pair of genuine Porsche seatbelts to replace the whole lot. The only thing is, it came with these super long sticks. So how they mounted on the seat meant they were right up here. So I dissected all the old ones, done a bit of modification, and now we've got 2 clips at the bottom with new Porsche seat belts all going to them. So we're back to modern seat belts. Much safer. The other thing with the seat belts is on US spec models, they have a light on the dash that flashes if you haven't got your seatbelt on. That's US only, but the light was always flashing. And what we thought first of all was because this wasn't in use, it was just setting the light off. But what it turned out, the wiring that was under the seat had all, for some reason, it hasn't melted, just all gone brittle and was touching. So I took both the seat looms out and that solved that problem. So now he hasn't got the annoying flashing light on the dash. And then last of all was all that dodgy stereo work. We had this one under the bonnet, that one in the footwell, and some questionable joins. Just so it comes out, join, join, join. It's just asking for trouble. We had this one was pretty tight going to the battery, which didn't help. And then all of this mess. This was all from America. The customer didn't even know that was under there. So we spoke to him, he said, just rip it all out. Even had a little remote control that goes on the inside of your steering wheel, which is pretty cool. But none of it really worked, so we got rid of all that. And now we've got our favourite modern equivalent. This is the head unit. We fit to a lot of our classic cars just because it looks retro, but it is in fact a DAB Bluetooth radio with that classic look. So that's all I've got left to do is get that back in the car. We'll connect up all the speakers, and that'll be more than man enough compared to all this amp and old school technology. And they're also very polite as well. So there's a lot of things I hadn't seen on these older 911s, just things that are in a bit different places, and when you find out why, it all makes sense. The first thing I noticed was the washer bottle is down the front, whereas usually you fill it up in the petrol cap and there's a tube that goes down and it's hidden in this corner. And the reason for that, as it turns out, is these early 911s have a battery box in each corner because they actually had twin batteries. So they had two small amperage batteries, I guess a combination of technology of the time and also good weight distribution on both sides, but they're no longer available. And a good common modern equivalent seems to be a Mazda MX-5 battery. So you can see there, it's all the way in the battery box, and I modified the original clamp so that stays in. But like I said, this is the most amazing respray I've ever seen. Even the inside is just as perfect as the outside. They put all new rubbers everywhere, all new trims. This is absolutely perfect. So we've got all that horrible old amp and all the dodgy wiring out from that corner. So now we can put all the carpets back in and go out for a test drive. We had Ray from T&M, who some locals might know as the Carb King. He came and gave us a little tweak just to balance the carbs up. And for a 1970s engine on triple weathers, runs absolutely mint. Right, out for a little test drive. Feel much safer actually having a seatbelt on now. I've bled the brakes up and tightened up the wheel bearings, so it should drive a lot better. It used to be a bit weird getting in these left-hand drive cars, but we have so many here at Auto Shack, it just kind of seems normal now. It's a beautiful day today. I couldn't think of any better weather to have a Targa. And now I've actually seen it outside, I can't believe how much this purple actually pops. It's more like a real Cadbury's purple colour. I'm sure you can hear them just behind me. Those Weber carb conversions do sound pretty amazing. Even for today's standards, this thing picks up pretty quick. So at the time, it must have been quite an amazing supercar.
As you've seen before, you've got to check the oil on these when it's warm and still running.
It'll put another quart in there. Perfect. You can see the oil circulating around in there. All good flow. Oil tank, no mistake. And I've just taken it for a test drive, and under here now is spotless. Nice and dry. Before that was just an oil slick. The rocker covers were completely covered in oil, and it all just dripped down onto the exhaust, onto the heat exchangers, and made a smoky, smelly mess. But now we're all as good as new. So that is all the final checks done, everything's topped up and it is ready to go back to the customer. Now I've seen this outside, the paintwork looks even more amazing. It's like the deepest, brightest Cadbury's purple you can imagine, and the paint finish is second to none. It is absolutely stunning. It is a real credit to DLF Classic Cars, and I still can't believe this was done over 10 years ago and it still looks like this now. Classic cars this old aren't really my cup of tea, but finding out all the history and all the information of this one just makes it that little bit more special. So I'm going to wrap this episode up here. Make sure you give it a like and be sure to tune in next time, because there's no telling what we've got here next to Auto Shack. It could be a classic, one of the earliest Porsche 911s. It could be a brand spanking new 911. It could be an Audi Quattro. It is no telling what is next here. But until next time, make sure you have fun.